Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Neil, for the invite. Um, Hello to all my UK cohorts and friends. And I'd just like to say that I wouldn't do this for too many people because I'm right in the middle of the biggest football game in Australia at the moment. So you're lucky you got me.
Okay, well, thank you.
It's the NRL, National Rugby League Grand Final. Um, Look, what I wanted to talk about today was three areas that I think are key to helping to solve the bigger picture. I know there are many possible keys. These are just three that I've been thinking about lately. Um, the first is how Oswald learned Russian. Uh, this came about through contact with a guy in Florida called uh, Jim Purtell, who's a ex-Vietnam vet. He thought that we could actually make some headway in this particular area, and he took me into researching it with him. This is based on what we wrote up about it. It's also based on some new information I found since then. So what we know is that most people, or the official view is that Oswald's language skills were not great in the military. That was the official view given during the WC testimony uh, that they had. And as we'll see later, that's not the case at all. His test results were actually very good. There are two tests that can be taken in the US military regarding foreign languages. The first is the Defence Language Aptitude Battery. This is not a test of proficiency, it's a test of your ability to learn a language. So it can be given at the start of your intake into the military, or it can be given before then through groups such as the ROTC or the Civil Air Patrol. I believe he took it possibly in the Civil Air Patrol. We do know that the Civil Air Patrol announced in 1948, and this was written about or broken in my book. I was the first to discover this interesting little side fact that it was going into the anti-communist business domestically and internationally, and was doing so in partnership with the FBI and CIA. Among its announced plans, teaching recruits in these programs the Russian language. It is a safe assumption that Oswald did have this test and showed he had the capacity to learn a difficult language such as Russian. This precipitated Ferry's pushing to get Lee into the Marines by masquerading as a Marine recruitment officer. It was no doubt he that turned up at Oswald's house with Lee. Lee was still in his cap uniform. The other person was in what Marguerite thought was a Marine outfit. Ferry was known for loving to wear military outfits around the place, and also known for pushing to get his cap recruits into the Marines. Um, when the story broke, we had headlines such as Pennsylvania sets up Gestapo aided by Civil Air Patrol, and from the New York Daily News, the plan released by the Pennsylvania wing indicated the organisation was getting set to send selected cap recruits to the Army Counterintelligence School at Holybird Signal Depot in Baltimore. It declared that the recruits would be taught the Russian language, Russian military tactics, Russian politics, and all characteristics of the Russian people. Um, what actually happened after this news broke was that there was such a backlash that the CAP announced that it was putting off plans to go ahead with this. It did not say it was abolishing the idea altogether, but it was never spoken of again, as far as I can tell. And the only really indication that it did go ahead are the records of David Ferry in New Orleans, which includes sending recruits off to uh, South America as emissaries and also to deliver messages. And also there was one report of him sending someone off to learn Russian. So I'm pretty sure that the CAP did go ahead with this, even if not quite the same as what was originally uh, talked about. And I'll also say that I'm currently updating my book, and what will be in the book is will show that the person that broke this news to the media paid a heavy price. It's quite an interesting side story to the whole thing. Um, once you've shown you have the aptitude, you can study a language in the Marines and then undertake the Defence Language Proficiency Test after 6 months of study. This is the test that Oswald took in February 25, 1959. The Marines and future investigators would later claim Oswald taught himself Russian and then requested the test. Whilst this is theoretically possible, requesting the test off your own volition would mainly be done by those entering the military with a second language already under their belt. That Oswald was allowed to teach himself Russian in the military without any inquisitiveness from the command structure, let alone without any assistance from them, is the part that places that finding in the realm of fiction. Um, Firstly, I think Oswald, having taken the language aptitude test in the CAP and doing well in it, uh, was indeed taught Russian in the Marines, and then given the proficiency test in Russian. To learn when he commenced study, we then, since you have to wait 6 months to take the proficiency test, to learn when he started lessons, we go back 6 months from then. If we go back that 6 months, it takes us back to August 1958. Uh, Then we need to consider that the date he took the test was not the date he would have requested it. And also, given that he took 30 days leave from November 19, 1958, he probably made the request for the test sometime in January 59, a month prior to sitting for it, having completed his 6 months of study just prior to his leave. So now we should be counting back 6 months from November 58, taking us back to June. June 27, 58 is when Oswald commenced 48 days brig time and is released on August 13. If you make a request for a test after 6 months of commencement of study, you need to have completed significant training. This is regarded as being either 6 weeks of immersion or 6 weeks of actual classroom study at a minimum 5 hours a day. You also need to have graduated high school. So what we see in Lee's military record, he did finish his high school and got got graduated in the military. That was a requirement of him doing the language, and uh, and I believe if we look at his um, time in the brig, that time equates to what would be the 6 weeks of immersion training or study. So there's no record of him actually being in that brig. Like when I say that, there's no record of a guard coming forward and saying, yes, I looked after him, or another prison saying, yes, I served time with him, or anything of that nature. It's a perfect cover to whiz someone off somewhere else for intensive study. Let's also consider that Oswald did not really serve 48 days as he was supposed to have. We know this because time served in the brig is added back onto your service time, and they only added 45 days back on. So if he enters the brig on June 27, and we count 6 weeks from that date, which is 42 days, we come to August 8, even though he was officially released on August 13. So what we have now is it looks more like that it was August 10. So now we have his alleged brig time equaling 6 weeks of language immersion or class study, plus 2 days travel time there and back. It all, mathematically, it all works out like that. August, November 58. This period was taken up with personal study after that brig time. And this is supported by people like fellow Marine Zach Stout, who told the HSCA that he knew Oswald was studying Russian, but didn't go anywhere for instructions. There's a Marine facility which keeps in touch through the mail, and he was under the impression that Lee was going to complete all those Russian courses, sign over, and go into an interpreter's assignment. He never mentioned anything about going to Russia, etc., etc. But Zach Stout's testimony there is very telling. I mean, Lee did the got his got his high school graduation. He the brig time allowed him 6 weeks of study, of intense study, and then following that, self-paced study for another 6 months until he could take the test. What Stout had to say to the HSCA supported what others had already said during the Warren Commission period. This, for example, is from Daniel Powers. He stated that he also vaguely recalled that while at Tsugi in Japan, Oswald was studying Russian, and he vaguely recalled that Oswald carried with him a dark blue or a black book, which Powers believed to be a Russian language book. This book was found by Robert Oswald among his brother's possessions. So what I've got under there is shows 2 Russian language books that the Robert had found. We go over the page and we can see that this edition, this isn't the actual book, but this edition of a short Russian reference in grammar shows it to be a dark blue colour, just as Powers had described it. Sorry, just as Stout had described it. Then we come to the testimony of Colonel Folsom, who talked about Oswald's Russian language test. The test form was the Department of Army Adjutant General's PRT 157. This is merely the test series designation. Now, under understands, the scoring was -5, which means he got 5 more wrong than right. The P in parentheses indicates poor. Under reading, he achieved a score of 4, which is low. This again shows by the P for poor. I believe Oswald's got -5 for understanding because it was an oral thing, and Oswald had poor hearing due to otitis media. The rest of it he did very well at. He goes on. Eli asks then, the 4 means you got 4 more questions right than wrong, which is confirmed by Folsom. Under right, he achieved a score of 3 with that P in parentheses again, which indicates, according to Folsom, that he did poor. His total score, if you add up all the pluses together and then take away the -5 for understands, we come up with a positive score of 2. With again that P, which uh, Folsom again said indicated poor. Was that actually true though? I say it's not. Um, what we have here is a chart. The ACTFL is the American Center for the Teaching of Foreign Languages. The DLPT is the military equivalent. So what we have here is the American Center for the Teaching of Foreign Languages. A novice or a low level score would be 0. Novice to mid level would be 2 zeros for listening and writing or whatever. And you go through it. And we come to a score of 2, which is what Lee's overall score was. And we see that that's the equivalent of the dance for the American Center for the Teaching of Foreign Languages. So we should regard uh, Oswald as having really done exceptionally well in that test, not poor, as Folsom insisted. Um, that's about all I've got on that side of it. But I think the evidence is that he clearly, whether it was through time in the brig or some other time where he was able to be whisked away, he clearly had intensive training followed by uh, self-paced learning leading up to his test in California. The next thing I wanted to look at was the Red Sox agent who was parachuted into Minsk. His name was Mikhail Potosky, or one of his names. He was known by other names as well. Um, I've been looking into this guy for quite some time, on and off. Operation Red Sox was one of the earliest CIA operations against the Soviets. It entailed training displaced persons to infiltrate territories such as the Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and the Baltic regions. Um, excuse me while I just wet the whistle. The idea was to gather information on missile silos and to link up with or create cells and contacts among the indigenous populations that could rise up and lead any resistance in the event of a revolution. The program was a catastrophe from go to woe, with 85% of those parachuted in being captured almost immediately. Yet the program continued through the latter half of 1960, when the Red Sox agent in Minsk was finally captured and executed. He was also one of the few who could lay claim to some sort of success in his mission. Krutowski was one of the 3 Red Sox agents parachuted in at the same time in May 1952. The 3 were instructed to make their way to separate locations for their missions. Plutowski was to make his way to Minsk, some 140 k's away. Plutowski was the least experienced of the 3, and unknown to him, he had little expectation placed upon his success. Of the 3, though, ironically, he was the most successful of the 3. Of the 3, one was captured almost straight away, while the other was captured in June 1960, trying to cross the border to escape imminent arrest. It was his capture that led to the arrest of Plutowski a few months later. When Taz broke the news, it was reported in the US that Plutowski was equipped with false credentials, radio transmitting equipment, ciphers, and codes. It said he was also to collect data on Soviet military units, important defence and industrial installations, rocket silos, air defence bases, and other economic and political information. The agency added he was instructed to go so far as to contact morally loose elements uh, and enlist them for espionage. It also said he carried 30 foreign gold coins and an ampule with poison for suicide in case of imminent detection, which none of them seem to have availed themselves of, funnily enough. Plutowski was instructed by the American intelligence service to take up residence in Minsk. This is from a separate story, uh, and start collecting secret information. The TAS announcement said. When arrested, he was found to possess 2 radio transmitters, ciphers, codes, duplicating equipment for printing anti-Soviet leaflets, and other espionage gear. TAS said Plutowski had been trained as a spy by US intelligence officers in espionage schools in West German cities, which we now know did exist. So, whatever you want to say about the Soviet Union and TAS, um, those stories that they put out about Plutowski certainly have more than an air of truth about them. Using Scott's negative template, we have to wonder why Plutowski is nowhere to be found in the 26 volumes and why his CIA file is not part of the, the JFK collection. It should be. He was one of the very few agents that successfully maintained radio contact with his handlers. He was to recruit from morally loose elements, and I emphasize that because if you look at Jean de Morenschildt's testimony, she says of Marina, she was almost sick that she wasn't getting enough sex. And at one point, Jenna asked, and she related to you these wild parties and orgies in Minsk. And Jean de Morenschildt confirmed that, yes, that's what she'd been told. The Red Sox program was abolished in the USSR after Plutowski's arrest, and after it is abolished, this is when we get the first inkling in Oswald's writing that he starts to think about returning to the US. And I don't think that's coincidental. Recalling too that once back in the US, he hooks up with people who were in fact part of the same recruitment recruitment ground zero, the NTS, which was the Russian Amigas group that George Bohé was head of in Dallas. The third thing I want to talk about is something that gets little, if no, attention anywhere, and I can only put that down to the fact that it's even too weird for conspiracy theorists, even those with tinfoil hats. Myself, I don't really give a shit. I'll follow evidence wherever it might lead. So on we plough. Firstly, we look at Parker Sullivan. Sullivan was the president of the General Telephone Company in Santa Monica, California. On November 22nd, 1963, at 11:35 a.m. local time, or 1:35 in Dallas, he contacted the FBI. This is just an hour after the assassination. The story then unfolds is one of the most incredible in the case. A big call, I know, but warranted. It is also, over time, one of the most ignored, and that's what I want to change. Let's make this story a bit more prominent than it is currently. Sullivan was appointed to the position in April 1962, having already established a stellar career in telephony. The General Telephone Company was actually the second largest telephone company in America at the time. So he was a fairly important guy and one who wouldn't have made such a phone call lightly. But before we get into the story of what prompted his phone call, let's um, dispose of the Rose Shirami story. Briefly, Rose had encephalitis at 12, according to her own son, who grew up to become a doctor. This can recur due to emotional or physical stress. Symptoms may include problems with speech or hearing, double vision, hallucinations, personality changes, and loss of consciousness. Other severe complications include loss of sensation in some parts of the body, muscle weakness, partial paralysis, etc., etc. Rose is always described as being drug affected when found, but that was not a diagnosis made by a medically qualified person. It was the opinion of a hospital administrator. Uh, I would imagine that being abandoned halfway through a drug run and then being hit by a car while hitchhiking might be considered traumatic and stressful. In fact, traumatic and stressful enough to trigger dormant encephalitis, which, recall the previous page, can include hallucinations as a symptom. Rose mixed in circles where she was likely to hear loose talk about the desire to kill Kennedy. None of it likely to have been more than just talk. She was simply, as I say, I believe, hallucinating, with details later developed by police and Garrison to fit the required narrative. It got so ridiculous that Rose ended up telling them that Ruby and Oswald had been checked up for years. Another thread already being explored by Garrison and now miraculously confirmed. I've got a more complete breakdown on all this on my subtract page, if anyone wants to read the rest of it. But getting back to what happened in California, there were two telephone operators named Dorothy and Jean. Both had 6 years of experience in the job. Just after 10 a.m., Dorothy was operating a toll call board and thought someone had a receiver off the hook as she heard a fuzzy sound and got no reply to a call of operator. Then, on hearing a whispering sound, she called Jean over to listen in as she thought the person may be in trouble of some sort. It is what the woman heard next that is the heart of the puzzle and what caused everyone, including these two operators, to conclude that the woman was crazy, and that became an easy way to dismiss the whole thing. What both women heard initially was numbers being dialed, followed by a whispering voice which said, "The president is going to die at 10:10. At this point, both women looked up at the wall clock, which read 10:08 or 10:08 or 12:08 p.m. in Dallas. According to the testimony of Charles Arnett, a reserve captain, at around this time on Main Street, the following was unfolding. Mr. Arnett told the Warren Commission, prior to the president's arrival at between Harwood and Pacific on Main, a young lady in her 20s, maybe 30-year-old, came up to me and said, "There are some kids right down there that's got a gun, some toy, handcuffs, and a knife." I said, "Would you show them to me?" She said, "Well, I'd rather not." So I went and got Earl Sawyer, a police officer that was working at the corner of Harwood and Main, and told him about it. He and I went back to the lady. He asked her. She said, "Oh, it's just a toy pistol." But some little girls then there told us where they were and showed us where they were standing. We walked up to them, asked them about the gun and stuff. They said the boy with the gun had walked off, and one of them gave us a pair of handcuffs and a knife. And I told him, and Sawyer. I took him and Sawyer went with me, and we carried him up to the juvenile department, up to the third floor. Just to clarify the way of speaking, apparently carried doesn't imply that they picked him up and carried him. It's just a term of used in Dallas apparently to indicate you took someone somewhere. Mr. Griffiths, was that a real knife the kid had? Mr. Arnett, yes, sir. The gun turned out to be a blank, like they shoot at starting races or something like that. When the parade was past us, one of the smaller boys that was in the group came up to me and asked me when his buddy was going to be turned loose. I said, I don't know, son, but I'll go up there with you and try and find out where he is. So we went up there to the third floor of the juvenile department. While I was there, someone rushed in and said, the president has been shot. Excuse me. Um, I don't know how Arnett determined that it was a starting pistol if the boy with it had taken off, but we'll assume for the sake of the story that it was, uh, because in the late 70s we find another strange story that matches that. But sticking with Arnott for a second, uh, what I believe he was describing was an aborted assassination attempt using a teen firing a starter's pistol as a diversion. A combination of the parade running a little late and Arnott's intervention caused the aborting of the attempt. And as I say, there is another example of this happening. Now, the reason I bring this story up again is that it fits in with what the operators in California heard the woman say. The president's going to be shot at 12:10 Dallas time. Um, and that sounds as if that's what was possibly happening there. A diversion with the kids followed by real shots, which was aborted after uh, things were running late and as I say, aren't intervening. Uh, but to get onto a later story where something similar happened, we come to the remarkably and magnificently named Raymond Lee Harvey, a drifter from Ohio. He was arrested by the Secret Service for having a dangerous name. That's a little joke there on my behalf. Um, he was arrested by the Secret Service after being found carrying a starter's pistol with blank rounds 10 minutes prior to a speech by Jimmy Carter at the Sills Center Mall in Los Angeles on May 5, 79. Harvey claimed he was part of a four-man operation to assassinate the president after being lured into the plot by three Latinos. Harvey was to fire the starter's pistol as a diversion. The full story of this can be found on Harvey's Wikipedia page, as well as in a few articles around the web. So I won't call that a precedent because it happened after, but at least it's a very similar situation as to what sounded like was happening on Main Street with Arnott intervening. Now back to the mystery phone user. We left off with the caller saying the president would die at 10:10. So what happened next? The same rapid whispered voice recited, the justice, the Supreme Court, there is going to be fire in all windows, the government is going up in flames. Gene Shaw's, the operator, thought this was being read. So it sounded like it was something that was being recited. The two women then thought the receiver was placed on the table while the party using it dialed 12 to 15 digits. At this point, Doris Blitz again asked if she could be of assistance. The reply was in a clear, normal speaking voice of a middle-aged woman. No, I'm using the phone, was all that was said. And gave no indication that anything unusual was happening. The party then went back to the rapid whispering, recital, naming of all the courts in order of appointments, starting with the Supreme Court and ending with the probate and juvenile courts. 10-10 had now passed without incident in Dallas, but the party was not through. She now updated her prediction by saying the president is going to die at 10:30 or 12:30 in Dallas, before reciting the names of all the courts again and adding the government takes everything lock, stock, and barrel. And of course, that prediction was absolutely spot on. Gene Shaw's heard no more after that, but Doris Bliss heard the caller whisper, thermostat, rheostat, heostat, before she faded out. The two women then immediately reported what they'd heard to the company president, Parker Sullivan, who, as we heard at the start, then contacted the FBI as soon as the news of the assassination reached them. Both ladies were certain the person was not telephonically connected to anyone. So despite what you may have read elsewhere, this person was not talking to another person, passing on information. She was using the phone as some sort of prop. Uh, it, and and that's all there is to it. She was using the phone as a prop. Um, And again, they thought she was mentally disturbed. That belief has kept this story largely buried among all the other cases of information given by genuinely mentally ill people. The FBI quietly closed the investigation upon hearing that the call could not be traced, other than to say that it originated in the Oxford Camarillo area. What can we say about the caller? Well, they described her when she spoke in a normal voice as middle-aged female. She was most likely Caucasian. Um, she was not talking to any other party. She spoke normally when replying to a question from the operator. At all other times, she spoke at a rapid, rhythmic whisper, as if reciting from something. She was speaking hands-free. She accurately predicted the assassination and at the same time, uh, or at a second attempt, after the first prediction failed. But even the first prediction had evidence supporting a potential attempt at that time. How I interpret these facts. If you want an accurate reflection on the era, on any era, look at the pop culture of the day. The 50s and 60s saw the height of the alternative religions, gurus, spirituality, the occult, uh, ancient wisdom, metaphysics, mind control, remote viewing, and magic rituals. You can tune in to just about any show on TV and catch an episode featuring one of these things. Gilligan's Island and Beverly Hillbillies are two that immediately come to mind. And this is what we're seeing in this phone call to no one. The phone was merely a prop for some type of incantation. The dialing of numbers part of the deal, numbers being very important in the occult. Does this mean she could see what was happening in Dallas? No. Count me in as a skeptic. Not happening. I believe she was hands-free because she. I mean, this is not about advocating the validity of this type of stuff. She and thousands of others did believe it, and that's the point. She was hands-free partly to perform actions in regard to a ritual, and she had to be in shortwave radio contact with someone on the ground in Dallas using a headset. So she had to have been told that first attempt failed, and she knew that the next attempt would be from the Texas School Book Depository at 12:30 or about that time. The references to fire and heat controls, such as thermostats, are another clue to her background and intent. There are certain things we can assume. The name of all the courts was not a friendly gesture to those courts. The name of the new government the talk of a new government taking over everything was also not a reference to a coming Marxist revolution. It is, in fact, reminiscent of Jack Ruby's warning that a new type of government was coming. He was talking about the Birches and the extreme right, and so was our friend in Oxford at this telephone exchange. Indeed, the one group who hated the courts and wanted to lynch the Chief Justice was the Birches. There was a lot of crossover between the Birches and the occult groups such as AMORC, which did teach remote magic using the power of the mind and some props. In fact, two alleged assassins were both members of AMORC, Juan Raul Sierra in Colombia in 1948 and Saran in California in 68. I suspect that there was a third assassin who was a member, but so far I have only circumstantial evidence for it. The assassination happened in a third country in the 1990s and resembles the 48 and 68 assassinations in all other respects. Um, again, I'm updating my book and finishing it off, or trying to. When I get to this sort of stuff in it, I will have further information and a suspect of who the caller was. Um, but I'll pass that information down on to you. I'll give you a heads up. Uh, there is one woman who fits all the criteria. Her name was Lucille Bass-Connell White. There was a 2011 book with the interesting title Psychotronic Magic, Constructing Electronic Devices to Amplify the Power and Effectiveness of any kind of ritual magic, sorcery, remote viewing, and remote influence, which is what this was about. I guess in the old days they could make do with a landline phone. I do believe the last object noted above, remote influence, was the one being aimed for here. So when I say that Lucille Bass-Connell White ticks all the boxes, she was a member of AMOR, she was a member of the Birches, she worked with anti-Castro Cubans in Dallas. According to Sylvia Odio, she made regular trips to the headquarters of AMOR, which was in California. She fits the bill. Whether it was her, I obviously am never going to know for sure, but I think she is a good, very good suspect. I guess that's it. I'm up for questions on any of this or any of my other research.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Greg. Okay. I've got a question from Mike Dworetsky.
Hello, Greg. You mentioned in California that the call was traced to the Oxnard Camarillo area. Are you aware that Camarillo is famous for the large mental institution that it has there? Camarillo has a mental hospital. Huge.
Did you hear the question?
I couldn't hear it very well at all.
Okay, so
I'm trying to work out what's wrong at my end.
So Camarillo in California is noted for
Yeah.
having a very large mental institution based there.
Yeah. That's the song Hotel California. Yeah, I'm aware of that. I don't think that's relevant. I don't think she was crazy. So,
Well, if you're looking for a crazy person, that's where you'll find it. Seriously, that is so well known in California. I mean, there are also crazy people in Oxnard, but there's no institution there. So I don't know if John Birch headquarters or whatever are in Oxnard.
Do you know where the John Birch headquarters are in California, Greg?
That time.
At that period?
off the top, no, I don't. I did know, but I've forgotten. I've read it somewhere.
Anymore.
It could well be in that area somewhere.
Yeah.
What does AMORC?
Yeah, the acronym AMORC, what does it stand for?
It's a Rosicrucian cult.
A what?
Rosicrucian. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Rosicrucian.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, okay.
It's a religious cult.
It's a religious cult, okay.
There's even a folk song about it that somebody's going to join the Rosicrucians.
Okay, I've never heard that. Any other questions at all? Okay, Johnny Cairns has got a question, Greg.
Hey, looking well.
Yep.
How you doing? I think it's yours.
Can you hear us, Greg?
No, I can't.
Okay,
Can't hear.
your video's frozen. Do you want to turn your video off? Because it might be a bandwidth issue. Might be his end. Greg, can you hear us?
Thermostat would probably turn this computer off.
Johnny, come over here because
The order of the Rosicrucians.
Greg, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine. Yeah. at the
Okay, all
moment.
right. Johnny Cairns has got a question.
Greg, looking well. How are you doing?
Yeah, mate. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just a quick one. I was just wondering when the next book's out.
I've started work on it, mate. I've got no idea how long it's going to take me. I'm dealing with a lot of other. I find it hard to say no to people, so I've got a long list of things I've been trying to plow through, while also dealing with some health issues. So it's been a slow process, but I've made a little bit of headway, and I'm determined to get it done as quickly as I can. I just got to start learning to say no to people.
Good man. Thanks, Greg.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Mike Gudretsky has got another question.
One of our members asked, Alaric Rossman.
Yeah.
Gave a very interesting talk and an article in the Daily Plaza Echo about Oswald when he was a Marine in California, meeting I think it was the airline hostess.
Oh, the aunt.
What was her name?
Was it an aunt of one of? It was an aunt.
Rosalind Quinn.
Yeah.
Yes, and that the interesting thing about it was that she felt that Oswald was very proficient in Russian at the time. And Albert raised the point that you needed a lot of schooling to reach that kind of level,
Yeah.
especially when he got to Russia. Didn't Marina once say that she thought he was from the Baltic states or somewhere because he had a funny accent, but he spoke very good Russian?
Yeah. So, did Marina once say that Oswald's Russian was pretty good, but it sounded like he came from one of the Baltic states, Greg?
Yeah, she did, and that's quite possible that when he had intense uh, lessons, he may have been taught by someone from the Baltic state. Also, if he was listening to phonographic records, they too could have been from the Baltic states. I don't know how much. I'm not sure I believe Marina about anything really, but that could be true. But there's also a perfectly logical or potentially logical explanation for it. Depends on who taught, how he learned and who taught him.
Right. And the other point Mike made was that when he was at one of the bases in California, I think it was the aunt of a fellow Marine, Rosalind Quinn, said that his Russian was pretty proficient.
Yes, yes.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, Rosalind Quinn's an interesting case. She was heading for a career in the diplomatic service, which I believe may have had intel ramifications. How many flight attendants fly across the country to have a date with a private?
Yeah.
I wouldn't imagine there'd be too many. So I think there was more to this than meets the eye, and she immediately after the date with Oswald then has a date with Oswald's superior officer, who himself was an ex-FBI agent. So and also headed for a career in the diplomatic service. So I think there's much more to that story than meets the eye too.
Yeah.
I already thought so as well.
Yeah, apparently, he's still alive. He's in a home, but there's a researcher that's been with DPUK for decades. Is that?
Alright.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Alaric Rosman, who's written articles for us in the Echo, including one on Oswald's Russian. Is that right?
That's the one.
Yeah. So if you go and look at, I don't know if you've seen that before, Greg, have you?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Okay, so Mike was just saying that we've still got a member. He's actually in a home because he's quite elderly now, but he's put together a lot of research over the decades and written various articles for us in the DPUK Echo. Alaric Rosman, have you come across him before?
Oh yeah, I've read some of Alaric's work. I like what he does. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is. If you go back and look, it's on our website. If you go back and look at the Echo back copies, there is an article with respect to Oswald's Russian.
What were his conclusions?
I don't know, Mike. Do you know?
That Oswald must have had a lot of schooling and training in Russian to reach a high level of proficiency. By the time we met Rosalind Quinn and subsequently went to Russia.
Okay, so his conclusions are in line with yours, Greg, that he must have had a lot of training and schooling by the time he met Rosalind Quinn.
Not just learning by.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that last slide I showed, showing that his overall score of 2, put him at the advanced level. So all this garbage that he scored poor is just total garbage.
Yeah.
His score put him at the advanced level.
Okay.
That was early on. Later on, we need more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mike's making the point that was relatively early on in this tale, so later on he would have been much better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Is there anybody else? Any other questions? No. Okay. Well, thanks very much indeed, Greg, and particularly as you missed the rugby league final to do that.
Hopefully it's still on. I'll catch some of it. It's my pleasure, mate. You guys do a great job, and I appreciate being invited to talk.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Greg.
Okay, mate. Bye-bye.